He threatened to throw her in the East River. She was drugged. She watched him beat Cassie. She woke up with Diddy on top of her. He controlled when she ate, how long she slept. He even slammed her arm in a door. Today, former assistants, a stylist, and security come forward to expose Diddy's alleged secret world of control, fear, and violence. This isn't just about one man. This is about how silence, power, and unchecked manipulation destroys lives. And today, that silence ends. Joining me today is my co-host for this special series, criminal behavioral analyst, my girl, Laura Richards.
Hey Lisa, a lot going on still with the Sean Combs trial, right? Now we're hearing about the workplace, a lot about what it's like to work for Sean Combs, and that's very important in this trial.
Let's just start with Capricorn Clark's testimony. I didn't know it could get worse until I heard what she had to say.
Yeah, and I think hearing that with her job, it came with so many other aspects of coercion and fear. And in particular, the time that she talks about 5 to 6 a.m. in the morning where Sean Combs appears at her home address. She's in bed, she gets out of bed in her pajamas, and he has a gun at her door, and he goes in, he says, "Get dressed, we're going to kill Kid Cudi." I mean, absolutely terrifying. And you know, a lot of people might not think about putting themselves in her shoes, but we have to. He's talking about killing Kid Cudi and wants her to go with him. So this is the part where we start to understand fear, coercion, but he's using other people in his organisation who are subordinate to him.
Yeah, God, I mean, that alone would be so terrifying. And just to stack onto this, where it isn't just that one thing. So he had her working from 9 a.m. to 4 a.m. on a regular basis. She didn't get any breaks to eat. On a good night, she would get 4 hours sleep. On a bad night, she would get 2 hours sleep. She only earned $65,000 a year. And even though she was doing overtime, she went to HR and they told her actually that they owed her $80,000 of overtime. She took that to Diddy and he just ripped it up in front of her. So now imagine these dripping effects, and then this happens. So talk to me about the power of those dripping effects, the things that she had to endure, that then when Diddy comes and knocks on her door, she doesn't say, "Get out." She doesn't call the police, that she actually ends up going with him.
Look, most people in her situation would not have a choice. Your boss is at your door 5 to 6 a.m. in the morning, and he's got a gun, and he's saying, "Get dressed." It's an order, right? It's a directive. And he makes her get in the car. So this is the kidnapping charge. And the fact that she does go and he goes into the home address of Kid Cudi, that's what she says, with a security officer of his, with Ruben, and she's outside and she's really panicking. She genuinely believes that Kid Cudi is in danger and she makes a call to Cassie. But in making that call, she changes the name and writes Storm for Cassie's number because she's fearful that he will find out. And he does. He comes out of the property, he takes her phone, goes through it all, and now he's angry at her. And he makes her call Cassie, and she says to Cassie, "He won't let me go until he will see you." And that was the demand of using her to get to Cassie. But even more so, this is a very important piece of her testimony because she's corroborating that it was Sean Combs who broke into Kid Cudi's home. And we have to remember that part because it links to the arson. And yes, so although people say there isn't concrete evidence that puts Sean Combs at the break-in, well, here we've got his assistant, former assistant, saying that he was there with Ruben and he went into Kid Cudi's home and she was outside. And more so that she was kidnapped and she was used to get to Cassie. This is the spider's web of coercive control. So her testimony, even if we just take that part, is incredibly powerful.
Okay, I always like to ground this because us doing this series is really about how do we echo and actually help women with everything we're learning. So in that situation, he's forcing her to call Cassie. As a woman, that would be so difficult. There's a man right here, he's threatening me. I've seen him do these things, so I know he probably isn't bluffing, allegedly. But I'm about to call another woman and almost bring her into the trap to try to escape. Now, I have utter compassion. I just don't know what I would have done. So what could you advise when someone's life is at threat?
This is a big thing, right? Every case must be looked at on its own on its own merit when you risk assess. And in this situation, being in her shoes, when a gun is involved, and this is your boss who you know when he says something, he's going to act on it, I can understand why she submitted to his demands. This is coercion, right? So we have to remember that. The second part is sometimes people call this, that she's fawning, that she's giving in. Well, she's not. She's being active in her own risk management. And Cassie's already in the trap, unfortunately. So she brings Cassie back in, but more so, Sean Combs says to her that you must tell Kid Cudi and tell him that he must not involve the police. And if he speaks to the police, I'll kill you all. I'll kill you and Cassie. And she believes him. This is what keeps people silent. And people will say, well, she had her own free will and her own autonomy. Well, when a gun comes into play, that changes things. And I've had lots of cases where a perpetrator might just get his gun out of the cabinet and start polishing it, or gets a knife out and starts cleaning it. That is a threat. It's a direct threat. So we have to understand that this is very real and it's credible. And you understand why someone submits to a demand and does something when there's a genuine fear to your life. She was fearful for Cassie's life too, and for Kid Cudi's. And that's why she did what she was told.
You said risk assessment. I want to keep going through her testimony, but quickly, could you give us maybe a bit of a foundation on how we can do a quick risk assessment if we find ourselves in a dangerous situation?
Yes, unfortunately with risk assessment, there's no quick shortcut to it, right? We can't hack it. And that's why I created the DASH risk assessment model, the domestic abuse, stalking and harassment and honour-based violence risk model. And you have to sit with the person and go through the questions. So actually there's no quick hack to risk assessment, but I'm looking at victims' level of fear. So when someone's really terrified, normally there's good reason. Some of the standout things are coercive control. I'm looking for signs of coercive control within the DASH. More than half the questions talk to coercive control alone. So this level of coercion when you're in the spider's trap. I'm looking for stalking. So 2 or more behaviours where there's fixation and or obsession. I'm looking for credible threat to harm or kill, and the victim believed them. So we know that when there's stalking and or coercive control, if someone makes a threat, half of them will act on it. 1 in 2, 50%. That's how important risk assessment is. And probably if I asked each person who has testified, either as his former assistant or somebody who worked for him, if I asked them, when he made this threat, you were going to lose your job, you were going to be killed, you were going to be exposed, your family were going to be harmed, did you believe him that he was going to do it? And I'm relatively confident that they would say, yes, I believe that that would happen. And the reason why is because we heard behaviours where he said he was going to do something and then he did it, where he suspended Capricorn Clark because she did not tell him about Kid Cudi, and he just suspended her and then fired her. That's why every case you have to look at, you can't just bring in, this is the quick risk assessment, this is the risk management plan. You have to really understand what's going on for someone.
Okay, so thank you for breaking that down. If someone wants to go a little deeper, where can they actually find your DASH risk assessment?
So dashriskchecklist.com.
Okay, cool.
And anyone can use the DASH. That's really important. If you're a brother, a son, a dad, you're worried about your sister, mother, you can use the DASH and talk with them. And if you're a victim yourself, you can use the DASH and answer those questions.
Cool, okay, thank you. So really want to make sure, guys, if you find yourself or anyone else could be trapped in this type of spider's web, please go over and check that out. I think resources are so important. The next thing I'd actually like to jump to is, so Capricorn Clark talks about the fact that she saw Diddy abusing and beating Cassie all the time. And she reaches out to Cassie's mum when she sees this just horrifying abuse. And this is a quote, "He's beating the shit out of your daughter. I'm in over my head. Please help her. I can't call the police, but you can."
Yeah, I mean, this is somebody who is desperate to help and just doesn't know how. And the fact she says, "I can't call the police," well, that's because she's already been told by Sean Combs that you have to make sure the police aren't involved. And if Kid Cudi goes to the police, or if you do, you will be harmed. So that's why she's trying another way to ensure that Cassie gets help. But what a horrible situation to be trapped within. And she's doing the best that she can under the circumstances that she's in, and she genuinely fears for Cassie's welfare and life.
So one other thing that ended up being in her testimony, which was so shocking, I just don't understand how people can get away with this, so help me really think through this. But they thought that she had stolen a couple of pieces of jewellery. So they end up taking her, this Uncle Paulie guy, who's part of Diddy's security, ends up taking her to this totally abandoned warehouse. And for on and off for 5 days, they put her and hook her up to a lie detector and keep questioning her. She turns to Uncle Paulie and says, what happens if I fail this test? And he said, they're going to throw you in the East River.
Yeah, I mean, I take a deep breath when I hear things like that, because for 5 days they keep her and they question her. Uncle Paulie is the head of security for Sean Combs, Paul Orford, and he is someone that you don't mess around with. And there was another man that was with him, security guy, who just was chain smoking. Pretty terrifying stuff, right? You're a lone female, you've been taken off by these two men, you know that they're credible in what they say they're going to do, and you don't know whether you're going to survive that. Frightening. So you've got credibility here in terms of these behaviours and how she's being treated, and her understanding that she's not just dealing with Sean Combs, she's dealing with the whole organisation. So again, this talks to the organisational element where Sean Combs is using other people to do these things. You don't expect that in your workplace, right? It's not just that he is a terrible boss, it's that people were in fear for their lives. If there was a misstep or you made a mistake, she misplaced this jewellery. Now, I don't know what happened to it, and of course it's very valuable, but this is the response and the reaction. It just seems so disproportionate to what's gone on. And this isn't just a toxic workplace, this is a terrifying place to work.
Yeah. God, we're going to get to Mia's testimony later on, but just kind of closing then, Capricorn Clark, what do you think the weight of her testimony brought to the case?
I think it corroborates what Cassie said. We've got the Kid Cudi part, and remember the arson charge, that there's now starting to be some triangulation. And she was there, she was present. This isn't just about hearsay. She put Sean Combs and a security officer in Kid Cudi's house. And you've got the kidnap and the demand, that this is also to get to Cassie. And then she gets fired because she didn't tell Sean Combs about Kid Cudi's relationship with Cassie. I mean, I think it's very powerful testimony that, again, corroborates what the star witness, Cassie, has testified to.
Mm-hmm. So this now takes us to the next testimony, which was Officer Christopher Ignacio and Lance Jimenez, I believe is pronounced. So talk to me about their testimony. What were the importance of this that then helps the prosecutor's case?
Yeah, so LAPD, the officer that testified, said that he was called to the break-in. So again, we're going back to Kid Cudi, and now we're joining things together. Mm-hmm. And that officer testified that as he drove in to where his home address is, a car was coming out that he clocked because he felt it was out of place. And that was a Cadillac Escalade, to the point that he memorized the registration, right, the number plate. This was something that he felt I should take note of. He goes to the address, and yes, there's been a break-in. What's important is that memorizing that number plate, when he did the checks, he found out that it was registered to Sean Combs' business, to Bad Boy Management. That is very important testimony, because now we've got a law enforcement officer testifying that a vehicle that belonged to Sean Combs was at the address at the time. Time, date, stamp. My next question to that is, and what did you do about it?
Right, yeah, like how did this not go any further?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Remember, there was a threat. Capricorn Clark was told, speak to Kid Cudi and Cassie, tell him not to pursue and speak to police, otherwise we will be harmed, the women. So that might have been enough to get Kid Cudi controlled, right, so that he doesn't pursue this break-in, this burglary. But it happened, and that's important. And LAPD, well, if they don't have a victim, i.e. if Kid Cudi isn't saying, I want this to be rigorously pursued, they may well just not pursue it. It could be as simple as that. But it's very concerning, because I think when we hear from the arson investigator, and that's just within weeks, that he's on the scene, sees that the Porsche's roof had been cut open, a Molotov cocktail placed inside, that was a targeted crime, and he made that very clear. This wasn't accidental, this was a targeted crime. So I would really want LAPD and LA Fire Brigade to be talking at that point about, we've got one property that's a hotspot that's being targeted. Why? This isn't just random. We need to pursue this. Oh, we've got a vehicle registered to Sean Combs. Oh, hang on a minute. We've got a credible threat. Now you start to build the case.
Mm.
And by the way, Lisa, this is why stalking offences are so difficult to identify, because you've got individual officers treating things as isolated incidents rather than as a pattern. And that's why we see very few stalking charges. But this is stalking. He has become a target, in my opinion. We know that there was a threat to Kid Cudi because he was dating Cassie, and Sean Combs said that he was going to do harm to Cassie and to Kid Cudi. So you have to join those dots. And this is very real targeted violence, and it's frightening.
Is stalking kind of perceived the same way as coercive control, where it's like, are you really in danger? Like, is that why people don't take it as seriously as you do?
I think there's lots of reasons. I think when you treat things as isolated, you don't see the big picture, right? But if you join these things together, you've got to have someone who's got the professional curiosity to say, hang on, what's going on at this address? If someone breaks in to a property, it's normally because they want to steal things. So to break into a property and not steal things, your professional curiosity as a police officer, even an arson investigator, should be tweaking. You should be thinking, why is this person being targeted? And why are they telling me they don't want us involved? What's the fear? What's the threat? So there's lots of reasons why, but stalking is about fixation, obsession, and intrusion on someone's life. And it can be about vengeful behaviour. This is vengeful behaviour. And we've heard all across different witnesses' testimony about how Sean Combs was vengeful. That's been consistent, wanted to take revenge, retaliation, retribution. People were in fear of that, because what we also know is, through the research and the analysis, is if you damage property like this, you fire set, you harm people too. You escalate to damage and harm people. So it's a very real risk.
Okay, in talking about how this case ends up stacking, there was a testimony from a stylist, Dante Nash. And here to talk deeper about coercive control and trauma bonding is someone who unfortunately knows it only too well. Dr. Nadine, now a psychologist, became a household name by being married to the infamous real-life Wolf of Wall Street. Welcome, Dr. Nadine.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So we want to talk about Dante Nash's testimony, specifically that he had witnessed a lot of abuse. And during one of the times, Dante Nash jumped on Diddy's back to try and hold him back from beating up Cassie. He then threw him off and turned around to Nash and said, "Look what you all made me do." Talk to me about how that becomes such a point that a lot of these abusers use to shift the blame and guilt.
Yeah, well, they're really experts at that, aren't they? Right? I mean, here he is physically attacking this young woman, brutally attacking her. And then he turns around and says, "Look what you made me do." And now all of a sudden he's the victim. All right. And clearly he's the perpetrator, and he's very pathological, but they blame shift all the time because it's really a mind game, even though they witnessed it, even though they saw it happen. Right.
So for somebody who's also experienced it, how did you, if you don't mind just giving us an example of the moments where you felt that got twisted? Like, what is happening to you internally where you don't just push back and say, "I didn't make you do anything"? Like, what's actually happening?
First of all, you're in shock, right? When you've seen something so traumatic like that. And then you're getting gaslit and you start to self-doubt. Wait, is that true? Did I really cause that? Oh, maybe I did do that. And you start to actually self-blame, and because you're really in a traumatic stress response.
So talk to me about the trauma bonding, because that's one thing you've brought up a lot, Laura, is that we don't address the trauma bonding enough, because like we've said this quite a few times in this series, but so many people are just like, why would you go back? So obviously we had that with Cassie, but even with Dante Nash, like he was still reaching out to Diddy. I think it was as late as 2020, after everything had just happened. And he wrote a message to him, says, "I love you, brother. If you need anything, I got you." So the defense are now saying, hang on a minute, if it was that bad, why do you send him this text message?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, back to the point of, look what you all made me do. That is the classic abuser psychology. It's so common that they say that there are actually books now written, see what you made me do, right? It's his own free choice. I just want to make it absolutely clear, violence and abuse are choices that people make. No one forced, no one was driven. He chose to literally rain down physical violence on Cassie because she was in bed or she wasn't doing something that he wanted her to do. But to the point of your question, well, what we know is that abusers aren't abusive all of the time. And often, and Dr. Nadine will know this, they use reward and punishment. So they would dangle the carrot of something to bring you back in. So we've heard that with other assistants, and we're going to talk about Mia, where she was offered, you can have any role in my organisation, and then she becomes director of development. So they dangle a carrot. And I think it's very important to state the fact that you can have someone being abusive. They're nice, charming, lovely to be around, and you want them to remain that person that's lovely and great and fun to be around. You want them to be that. But you've then got this, sometimes it's 15 to 20% of the behaviour being something completely different. And all people give those they like the benefit of the doubt, right? Particularly when we're being charmed or we're getting something out of it. We work for that person. And with Deontay Nash, he was very good friends with Cassie. He was her stylist, I think it was for 10 years, right? He got to know her really well. But this is going a level beyond. And we have to remember, it wasn't just Deontay Nash who was there, it was also Mia. We've got multiple witnesses saying that this is what Sean Combs did. And why I say that is this is not a he said, she said trial. But people do go back. We know actually for women, it takes you at least 7 times to effectively leave the male domestic abuser and coercive controller because of the trauma bond that you have, the re-grooming, which we talked about, the gifts, the reward and punishment. But those rewards tend to be big. And if you hold secrets, they want to keep you quiet and keep you inside their team, their tent. So it's not as straightforward as this terrible physical act happened, he should just give his notice and then that's the end of it. They are all caught in a trauma bond to Sean Combs, and abusers groom everybody. They don't just groom the target like Cassie, they groom everyone else around her too.
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Laura said, is that they were all trauma bonded to him through this kindness and cruelty, intermittent behavioral reinforcement. And then you also have to remember that it's as crazy as it is, victims want to please their abuser. They have a conditioned response to him, to fear him. And how do we often control people that we fear? We act nice to them so they don't act out.
How much of the 80-20 rule, though, based on what you were saying, Laura, I mean, it feels so strong because, to your point, if they were cruel and abusive 100% of the time, I think very quickly, hopefully, you would leave. But you hold on to I remember in July 20th when he did this one thing, and you will spend a year remembering that one moment.
I always say hope is the hook, right? And if we are attached to somebody, we want to believe that there is some good in them. And maybe the first person that they initially met, the nice Romeo guy, is really who they are. But unfortunately, they're not. They're one sick, pathological, manipulative individual.
And it's also important to say, when fear is in the room, consent is not. So you don't give your consent when there's a fear factor going on. And that's something I always say, when we do a risk assessment, the DASH risk assessment, for some victims, it's the first time they're seeing the full pattern laid out, the first time that they see everything that's going on, and it can really wake them up. And it can also be quite frightening. But going back to the trauma bond of how people react, a lot of victims will cycle through the different types of trauma response, right? And it's really important to say, because I've seen this going on online, people say, oh, it's Stockholm Syndrome with Cassie or with any of the
Can you
witnesses.
explain Stockholm Syndrome just in case people don't know what that is?
Yeah, I mean, I want to debunk it. 100%. It does not exist, right? So Stockholm Syndromes, people say, oh, rather than trauma bonded, they say, oh, it's Stockholm Syndrome, which came from a male psychiatrist, Niles Bergerot, who was a police advisor to a bank robbery in Sweden, right, in Stockholm. The short story is that a number of people were held hostage for days, and one of the female hostages that had a gun put to her head, Kristen Enman, she listened very much to the man who had the gun to her head. She knew there was a SWAT team of police officers and she ignored them and she paid attention only to the man with the gun to her head. The male psychiatrist said she fell in love with her attacker. She bonded to him, and this is Stockholm Syndrome based on one case, even though that victim said on a radio interview, I had no feelings at all other than fear to the man with the gun to my head. I paid attention to him because he was the threat. And so we've totally debunked Stockholm Syndrome, but we still see it in every day, even online, people saying, oh, Cassie, it was Stockholm Syndrome. Absolutely not. The other thing that I want to just pay attention to is the trauma-related responses, because the fight or flight syndrome that we know about because of Sir Walter Cannon's work in 1915, 1920, 1935, it came from his work studying men only, of what do men do when there's a credible threat? Fear. So we might have somebody fighting it, or they might be flight. They disappear. They didn't study, or he didn't study women. So that's a problem. And this is how women get lost, along the way, and sometimes pathologized by our own responses. Because then you had a male psychotherapist saying, oh, there's a fawn response. So now we've got 3 Fs. So we've got the flight, we've got the fight, and we've got the fawn. And fawn, that conjures up, somebody just gives in, they just cave. But that's not what women do. Women are actually very active in their own risk management. They know who the threat is, they will collaborate, they will use their communication skills to talk that person down. They might even say, I love you, to stop them from escalating their behavior. Do they mean it when they're genuinely fearful? No. So we mustn't take a response that women do every day because we know we don't hold physical power. We collaborate, just like Gayle King did when R. Kelly was over her like this. Robert, she was trying to de-escalate his behavior. She's done it many times before. Then you've got the 4th response, which is the freeze, which may well happen. But most victims cycle through things and it's very active what they're doing. The other part to that, people say, oh, it's learned helplessness. No, again, victims have to figure out what works to stop the escalation, to calm the abuser down. But often women get these terrible names attached to them, or it's seen and misunderstood. Oh, well, you must have liked it. Here you are saying, I love you. This is what was said of Tina Nash. He gouged her eyes out with his thumbs, held her for 12 hours. She says, I love you, to stop the continuation of the attack. Does she mean it at that point? No. So again, we have to really understand when fear's in the room, consent is not. Victims are trying to survive. And I'm saying it as simply as that. They're trying to survive and stay alive. Wouldn't you do anything that you felt necessary to keep yourself and or your children or someone else around you alive?
Yeah, Laura, I can speak to that because I remember after my ex kicked me down the stairs and he was driving my daughter and I into the garage. And I remember finally when I got my daughter safe, I remember just my whole entire nervous system stopping and me just saying to him, okay, it's okay, it's okay. Just trying to appease him and calm the situation down because I feared for my life. Now, luckily, I got very lucky that the police came a second later, but I remember myself just being like, okay, Jordan, like almost talking to him like a little boy.
And so had you tried other behaviors, so going back to like the freeze, the fawn, the fight?
I tried fight first, then I got kicked down the stairs, right? And then he fled, so I ran after him. So I really tried fight first. But then I got into that very appeasing fawn state because I was like, I'm in trouble here. And I'm trying to appeal to something in him, some ounce of humanity.
You're trying to get rapport back with that person and ground them back in reality. It's me, it's okay, it's not a problem. That's not because you're acquiescing. That's not because you're fawning. It's a very active strategy. And it's a huge disservice to women like Nadine and others who are kind of given this label and it's being misunderstood rather than they are fighting for their lives and their children's lives, which was your situation too. And you're using your communication skills. Because women normally have to use communication skills because we don't hold the physical power. Men can puff their chest out, right? We take the cue. If you puff your chest out, who's going to think that you're a real threat when you've got someone as wound up as Jordan or as wound up as Sean Combs? So we have to really ground this back in women's lived experiences. And we have to remember that perpetrators do use other people that they know you care about the most and threaten them. Like Cassie, we're going to send these tapes to your parents' workplace so they lose their jobs. I mean, these sorts of things that people should be absolutely shocked by, but abusers will use every tactic they can to control and to maintain that control and dominance and power.
So then talk to me about shame. Because one of the things that, as Dante took the stand and the defense are grilling, part of it is, well, if it was really that bad, if Cassie was really going through all these things, if it wasn't consensual, if she didn't really want to do these freak-offs, why didn't she tell you sooner? I think it was like over 5 or 6 years. And when she eventually said, look, on these tapes is me having sex with other men, the defense tried to use that as a way to be like, but if she was really being threatened, if she was really being forced, then she would have told you earlier. Talk to me about the power of shame.
I mean, it really disables, it stops you from speaking out. But I think we should probably mention that Deontay Nash's testimony actually was powerful to the point that Cassie did tell him. And she said, I don't want to go to the hotel and freak off with him. She made it clear to him that there were threats to release those tapes. And he actually said, well, just let him release the tapes because he's on them too.
Yeah.
Do you remember we talked about that?
Yeah, I literally asked you the same thing. Yeah.
Well, his answer was that Cassie replied, he's not on the tapes.
Oh, yeah.
It's me and the other men. So Deontay's testimony was powerful in that sense that she did tell people she wasn't happy. She wasn't offering consent all of the time. And we talked about that last time, that you can give consent the first 4 times, but when you withdraw it, no is no. That is not consent. So, but the shame of having all of these tapes and probably feeling that she was partly responsible because she was texting him saying, Sean Combs, I can't wait for the next freak off. And of course, the defense are making a lot of that. But she's complicit for a reason. And then as threats come in, I'm going to send those tapes to your parents' workplaces, i.e. they will get fired. How humiliating is that? Well, that can be enough again to make her rethink who she tells and whether she actually does anything about it or whether she carries on doing what he tells her to do. But shame is paralyzing.
I mean, listen, aside from myself facing it, I work with so many women who I've sat with for years before they'll really tell me what's actually happening in their home, because the victim always feels so much shame. And I think the fact that she didn't talk about it actually shows how much shame she was feeling, because what does shame mean? To hide. She wanted to hide that she was actually engaging in these insane sexual escapades that were really against who she was in her core.
So how would you advise somebody that maybe, again, really trying to ground this, if someone was going through something even remotely similar where they're facing shame, but it's being used against them, how do you overcome that?
I think that what you have to do is say, okay, release them. You have to face it and you have to realize that the shame is always should be on the abuser, not on the victim. And if somebody has something over you and they're holding it over your head, just challenge them honestly. And maybe if it does come to fruition, then it's not hung over your head anymore. And it actually gives you some empowerment and more freedom. Because as long as they have that, they have you. It's another way that they're coercively controlling you.
Yeah, it's so strange, a bit of a mind twist that in allowing that to bear light is what will eliminate it.
It's like everything in life. You lean into your biggest fear. You're fearful of flying, so you gradually immerse yourself and then you do it. It's a similar kind of thing, but of course this is a sort of Damocles kind of thing being held over your head. And you fear judgment and shame and humiliation, and because you're probably being told it's partly your fault or it's all your fault. And who's going to believe you? Because I know I sent him these text messages saying, I can't wait for the freak off. So that will also keep someone entrapped. But I will also say, I agree with Nadine, but it depends what the stakes are. If guns are involved and people are being held hostage, then I would review that. And, obviously if there is a genuine, credible threat to someone's life, you do have to think about it slightly differently. and particularly if you've got stalking and coercive control, and someone who is powerful, and when they say they're going to do something, they do it, and they seem to be untouchable. I want to add that part in because he was and has been untouchable. You know, we heard testimony from Mia that parking tickets, speeding tickets would just disappear. LAPD, they just disappeared. Now, that's a very clear message, isn't it, Nadine, to all of those people seeing that happening, that a police officer saying, oh, who's your boss? Oh, show me. Oh, it's Sean Combs. Oh, the speeding ticket disappears. That means when Mia testifies that Sean Combs was a higher authority than the police, she believed it. And when you see all these behaviours and other assistants and employees and victims testifying to that same pattern of fear, retribution, retaliation, coercion, he says he's going to do it, then he does it. That is very paralysing as well, that untouchable notion of Sean Combs. One last thing just to say about Deontay, because I do think he was very powerful in his testimony of corroborating the violence, so triangulating it with other witnesses, but the fact that Diddy controlled Cassie's career, he talked to that, and that she was very good at what she was doing and that he held her back, that she didn't want the freak-offs. But he was also asked a question which was a bombshell that there was no follow-up to. He was asked that when under Sean Combs's organisation, did he commit any criminal acts? And he said yes. Now, there was no follow-up because the defence asked this question, which clearly they hadn't planned to ask and they didn't know the answer to. But the fact that he said yes, and they didn't follow it up because you leave that well alone, that's, again, the racketeering and conspiracy and criminal enterprise. So we don't know what those criminal, when asked what criminal acts they were, we don't know.
And the prosecution can't then redirect?
Well, it depends where they are in the testimony. But for me, that was a bombshell because each employee that we've heard from so far, former assistants, have been involved in covering up, in colluding with Sean Combs. Whether it's by fear, favour, coercion, etc., that's another matter. But when we're talking about the RICO charges and conspiracy, we're seeing people within his organisation committing crimes. And as I said before, you only need 2 predicate crimes, and we've already got arson, kidnapping, we're going to hear about forced labour, and we've heard about sex trafficking. You only need 2 of them. So just when we're overlaying what the charges are and what we're hearing in terms of testimony, there have been some bombshells that other people might not notice, but they are important bombshells because they talk to a pattern. It's really important because the defence are going to keep pushing that, yes, he's a vile boss, yes, he's a horrible human being, but these are isolated incidents. So we have to keep really driving home this is patterned behaviour from him, but also people who worked for him, who were in his organisation.
We're going to the other assistant, actually. So Mia, you mentioned her earlier, and that is a pseudonym. She's victim number 4, and her somewhat job description, as she laid it out in her testimony, is she goes for the job interview. She gets interviewed by Diddy himself. She goes to his apartment, and he's sitting there in his underwear on her job interview. There were times where she went 5 days without sleep, and so she had to take Adderall just to stay awake. He controlled where she went. She always had to be in his line of sight, which is insane. So now I actually want to go to the last part that she said is it wasn't all bad. She's like, they were massive highs, excitement, like just enjoyment, and then deep, deep lows. Talk to me about those ups, highs and lows. And I know that we mentioned the 80-20, but for somebody who isn't in a romantic relationship, being around that type of thing, how does that influence her and impact her staying and not leaving?
Oh, massively. I mean, and even to the setup of how they first meet, he's wearing his underwear, right?
Oh my God.
I mean, some advice, you turn up to a job interview and that person sat in their underwear, do not proceed because they're grooming you. Right, this is a setup to see how she reacts, to know whether she's malleable, compliant, and it's only going to get worse. The same as Weinstein.
Laura, it reminds me of your boundary erosion.
Absolutely.
Because right there, there's a boundary erosion.
Absolutely, and it's intentional. That's why I always say the setup, how they meet and how they come together, he would have thought that through. That is not appropriate. I don't care who you are.
Yes.
So there's a message to her right there.
Yeah.
You add in all the other layers that you talk to, and the fact that he's Sean Combs, right? And it's one of her first jobs. That power imbalance And the fact that there's some real high highs and real low lows, I see that with abusers all the time. And that's what keeps people there, whether they're in the workplace or whether it's the same concept, right? That it keeps you in there. But you want homeostasis, you want an equilibrium. You don't want these high highs where it's just, you're releasing endorphin, serotonin, dopamine, you know, all these good things, and then you crash out. You're forced to work 5 days, 5 nights, no sleep. You have a physical breakdown.
Yeah, she had a physical.
That is not okay. So knowing that whirlwind, it's like a whirlwind relationship, right? It just mirrors back how abusers behave in their personal lives to the people that they have relationships with. So the control he had on her, saying things like, you stay within my eye line, you can't lock your bedroom door. If you stay here, you can't lock your bedroom. If we travel, you can't lock your bedroom. What he's basically saying is, I want to access you whenever I can. Because he's not saying that to the male security guards that are 6'5", that you can't lock your door. They could, and she couldn't. So why does he want access to her? You know, these are huge red flags.
Well, she testified that she woke up one day and he was lying on top of her. And to your point of, you're told you can't have locks on your doors, but male security guards can.
And he says, it's my house, my rules. So that's another important part, Nadine, isn't it? That we see a lot, that it's my house, my rules, I make the money, it happens this way. And therefore you're not even in your needs, your personal autonomy.
No.
Totally disrespected.
No, and I think her testimony was so important because the defense is saying, you know, between Cassie and Diddy, it's just a romance gone bad, right? This is just two toxic, dysfunctional people that are in a bad relationship. And clearly with Mia, there is a severe pattern of coercive control, sexual assault. This is who this man is.
So the one question I have for you ladies is I read a story that she said on the stand where she talks about she's with Diddy, she's at a party, he gives her 2 shots, she drinks them, then he tries to kiss her and put his hands up her dress. She just froze. So you guys spoke about the freezing before. Then she woke up in a chair and she said she felt very wrong. She didn't know what was happening. It was very strange for her. She just didn't tell anybody though, because she said, well, I don't know, he was drunk. Maybe I was drunk. And so maybe it's just a one-time thing. As she lays out her testimony, each time she says a horrifying act, she keeps repeating, I just thought maybe it was just this one time. Talk to me about that, of why that is something that we convince ourselves is true and how that's like one of the biggest freaking traps ever.
Well, I think most women have been in a situation, right? I'm going to ground it back to all of us where we've been there and something like that has happened. Did it happen or did it not? Well, he's acting normal. Maybe it didn't. Maybe I imagined that, but I definitely drank too much, right? And she said 3 vodka shots. She's had shots before and she feels like something's not right. Did he drug her? Question mark. It's possible. Had she been working, you know, again, this was the 40th birthday, had she been working 4 or 5 nights in a row and therefore it hits you differently? But the fact she did say he kissed her, put his hand up her dress, boundary violation. And that's what she does know. She doesn't know the bit that may come later, but he's also her boss. And so maybe chalking it up to, well, something may have happened, but he's acting normal, so I just carry on. This is my first job. I, got to keep it moving. But then when it happens again, she talks about...
And sorry, just to go back to what you said earlier, actually, about the priming. Well, when she got job interviewed, he was in his underwear. So actually, when you think about the kind of small, slow, gradual, that kissing, I mean, look, again, it is wrong, but that then becomes like another little stepping stone of, am I eroding her boundary, yes or no?
And that's grooming, right? It's like Jeffrey Epstein in his house having naked pictures of girls all the way up his stairwell and girls who were topless in the pool, so that when young girls and women were walked into his property, they see all this nudity and they see sex toys and everything around, and now they're being groomed into this is just normal. And if you react to it, oh, well, you're just a prude, what's wrong with you? But this is the grooming that goes on in the setup. So yes, and I think most women have had that situation where someone has overstepped. Did you imagine it or did you not? But then when it continues, he's still her boss at the end of the day. So she talked about 2009 or 10 when she's at his home in LA and she's asleep in the bunk bed, the bottom bunk, wakes up, he's on top of her. And he says he wants sex. She says no, he does it anyway. These are the stepping stones, Lisa, as you describe. The grooming, the trying to take her power away, taking away her ability. She says no, he carries on anyway. And look, I've heard people say this is forced sex. I want to correct the record. This is rape. If you wake up to a man on top of you, even if they say to you, do you want sex? The fact she said no and he carries on anyway.
Sorry, people think, so forced sex is rape, isn't that?
I've heard it described so many times of, oh, he forced sex, and the intention is to make it sound lesser than rape, but this is rape. And I want to make that clear. This is another one of my pet peeves that I see even in legal documents, things written up to dilute, underage prostitutes. There's no such thing with Jeffrey Epstein. Underage prostitutes was one of his charges. There's no such thing. If you're a child, you can't consent. But this language change and erosion, it's intentional. This is patriarchy trying to influence that it's something much lesser. So I just want to correct it because I see it often. I've seen even commentators call it that, but this is rape. And she said it continued. There was another time when he just came out of his closet, he's got his penis out his pants, and then he forces her head down. Well, again, that's forced rape. It's forced oral sex, right? She didn't consent, but she said she had no power. She felt it was her fault. She couldn't say no because even when she did, he did it anyway. And that, I just find that so sad because we have to think about that power imbalance again of who he is, this magnetic personality, high. She wrote some good stuff about him on social media. She's stuck in that trap. This is before Me Too. This is before, a lot of social media where people could write things, but when she wrote things, it tended to be positive things. So, and she's seen that he's untouchable. So she's caught in this trap. And even with the sexual violence and the rape, she felt that it was her fault. She actually said, each time, and I felt so desperate. But every time she said that there was, a reward and punishment that he put in place. And I think that part's very important, particularly with Cassie. This reward and punishment that we see on Biderman's chart of coercion, where the carrot is dangled and then you're brought back in and you think, well, hopefully now they've got the message and it won't happen again. And now I'm the director of development for his production company. I've got 2 titles now and hopefully this won't happen again until it does.
Well, he slammed her arm in the door as well, deliberately. So talking about reward and punishment, it can be almost probably, I'm sure, part of the fear is you don't know what type of punishment it's going to be.
Yeah.
And Lord, also reminds me of when you talk about the mind control, how they literally infiltrate your mind. And almost like the denying and the rationalization is almost implanted in there by him.
So talk to me about the rationalization again, because that's the one point I really want to make sure I fully understand. So she had said multiple times, like maybe it was just this one time. After like the 5th time, what is happening? Is it that you have just been broken so much that you have to give yourself a justification of why you're not leaving? Like how after 5 or 6 times of all these, I hate to say it, rape, arm slammed in the door, do you still tell yourself, maybe it was just one time, maybe it was my fault? What is that?
Well, if you think about it, he's been breaking her down since his first meeting in the underwear. Right? He's raping her, he's abusing her, she's seen him physically abuse and harm other people and threaten people. And so she doesn't trust herself anymore. I mean, she has no trust within herself to probably make a good, healthy decision at this point. And so she's almost like a rag doll, unfortunately, in a way. I mean, I remember myself, I was just like, it can't be that bad. I'm making it up. Look, he was so nice yesterday, right? There's the reward. He did this for me. So it's very challenging. And she lost herself. She lost her whole sense of self. You would have to lose your sense of self to stay in that situation. You can't have autonomy or agency and be in that dynamic.
Yeah, and I'd also add to that and say that, she also said that he was her best friend at times or acted like that. And that's very powerful that he treated her like a work partner at times, best friend, the high, and then the low, where he just treated her like crap. But all of the language that she used was about permission, that he would have to give her permission, even to go somewhere or for Cassie to go somewhere. They had to ask. So she talked about that Prince party where he had said, you must stay to Cassie, you have to stay at the hotel, I think it was, or at home. Her and Mia sneak out, and even that language, sneak out like they're children.
Yeah,
right?
so true.
That they sneak out, he gets wind of it, he turns up at Prince's party, they see him coming across the room, and obviously, however he looked, gave them the fear factor, and they ran. They ran across the lawn to get out. He then grabbed Cassie, he starts beating up Cassie, and it's Prince's security team that pull him off, right? So the other part I want to add in is when other people aren't reacting of, oh my God, this is horrific, they may have pulled Sean Combs off and stopped that, but when other people like Mia and Cassie aren't seeing, my God, this is just outrageous, we have to do something, that normalizes it again. So again, we get this, it just becomes normal, right? It's routine. And the violence was routine, the fact that she says, and I just want to quote her, she said that if I did something without Sean Combs' permission, the punishment was unpredictable and terrifying. Living your life like that is horrific, but that just becomes normal. And when other people aren't reacting to it either, it's normalized. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what he and the lieutenants and the security guards and everyone just did very well, of acting as if this was all normal, which of course it's not normal.
Yeah, that's the culture now. That's just what's accepted within their culture, that you tolerate this behavior.
And you surround yourself with the people that have that same culture or that will tolerate your culture.
Yeah, well, you surround yourself with yes men.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, basically, he's a mob boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly it.
That's what he seems like to me when I was listening to everything this morning. I'm like, okay, so basically he's John Gotti.
And that's the truth of the matter, Nadine. That's why the RICO charges and conspiracy and criminal enterprise, but most people can't make that leap and see that he's giving orders and instructions to people, normalizing violence. And Mia said if Cassie didn't pick up her phone in time, whatever that means, and she didn't respond, she was bombarded with text messages, calls from the security team and others, and then security would appear to threaten her, to tell her she had to speak to him. That's not normal, right? Most of us don't have to pick up our phones within a time window, but you do if you're with a coercive controller. But all of this is normalized because everyone else is playing to Sean Combs' tune.
All right, Dr. Nadine, thank you so much for joining us, girl. Any last words before we say goodbye?
No, just thank you so much for having me on. This is such an important conversation, and this education is needed now more than ever. And I'm so sorry for the victims that were involved in this, of course, but it is an amazing way to take something that's absolutely horrible and educate and empower others. So thank you so much for having me on, ladies.
Oh my God,
thank you.
Of course, and I just want to thank you for your bravery and always speaking out and coming on and always speaking your professional advice as well as your own personal experience. You're so unique in being able to talk on both sides. So thank you so much again. Appreciate you, girl.
Bye, guys.
Take
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Laura, we've gone over a lot of the testimony that happened this week. As just kind of a quick recap now, how much of what happened this week helped the prosecution? And then what do you think will need to be seen in next week in order to stack?
Yeah, I mean, for me, because I understand the subject and what's gone on, I think the prosecution are doing a good job, right? They're layering brick by brick. They're being very specific, very selective. To other people, and even the jurors, I don't know whether it's landing in a similar way, i.e., the prosecution are very much dependent upon when witnesses can testify, and therefore the sequence, the chronology can be out, and that can be quite hard for people to draw these disparate pieces of information together and make sense of it. And I think that is a challenge. Some people are saying, it's quite disjointed, but that's the job of closing, to pull it together. Are the defence doing a good job? I think they are under the circumstances. They're trying to show that things were consensual. They're trying to show that there were these high highs of, well, why didn't the employees leave if it was so bad? Why didn't, they're poking holes in things. And of course, they tried to get a mistrial declared. They requested a mistrial. They're trying everything that they can because that is a tactic that's used a lot. And what that gives a nod to is that if they lose that request for a mistrial in court, they might bring it back on appeal, right? So that's important. And I've heard, even with Mark Geragos, Tenny's father, he's speaking out and, trying to say that the prosecution are very disjointed, they're not doing a great job, there's a big overreach. I don't agree with that. But who else do we need to hear from? I would really want to be hearing now from security officers that work for Sean Combs. I still think we need to make that absolutely clear that people were working under his instruction and committing criminal acts, doing terrible things and normalising the violence and abuse and being used to keep Cassie entrapped and other people. You know, 6'5" burly man stood over you. What are you going to do? On her 29th birthday, Cassie didn't want to go to a freak-off, and then you get all the security officers around her, just their physical presence. That's coercion. Yeah. So I think they are building the case, the prosecution, brick by brick, and it's a slow burn, but I can see what they're doing, and the house is starting to be built.
Oh, Miguel, where can people follow you? You put out such amazing stuff. You have a website that's just stock full of just a lot of resources. So where can people go? TheLauraRichards.com. There's information on stalking, coercive control, and quizzes that you can ask yourself or a loved one if you suspect that they're being abused or coercively controlled. DashRiskChecklist.com, which is the actual tool. Crime Analyst is where all the podcast is, and Crime Analyst Squad is a great empowering community that if you're being victimised, it's a great place to be because there's a lot of support, a lot of information, or even if you're a professional or anybody else, it's great career professional development. I give a lot more input and materials, bite-sized things in there, and that's on Patreon. It's patreon.com/crime analyst. Guys, each week more and more things are coming out. But the reason why me and Laura are showing up every single day is to really try and take that information that's coming out and protect the women like you guys. Or maybe they are in a position like Cassie, but they don't have anyone to turn to. They don't have anyone to turn to. So guys, please do share this episode. Share it with your mum, your sister, anyone in your life that needs protection, that needs to learn the lessons. And if you're not following me, follow me at Lisa Bilyeu. Guys, we are launching these episodes every single week. So make sure you put on that notification button so that you can get notified every time we come out with a new episode. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace. If you want to learn more about how on earth this type of things happen, and you want to learn the signs so that you never get trapped, and you want to watch more of this Diddy series so that you can understand deeper what coercive control actually looks like, then click here right now. If it was that bad, why didn't Cassie just leave?